Few religions in the world are as well known, and yet as mysterious, as Jehovah's Witnesses. You've probably seen them at your door, always impeccably dressed, carrying their distinctive magazines and offering warm smiles. They speak about paradise, about living forever, about being part of the only true religion on earth. But behind those friendly faces and colorful publications lies an organization with rules so strict, so all-encompassing, that they control virtually every aspect of a believer's life. Jehovah's Witnesses present themselves as the only group truly faithful to the Bible. They claim to have discovered truths that all other religions have missed or corrupted over centuries. But many former members tell a very different story. They describe life inside the organization not as spiritual freedom, but as a system of control, spiritual, emotional, and psychological control that dictates everything from what you can celebrate, to who you can befriend, to whether you can save your own child's life in a medical emergency. Think about that for a moment. Imagine living in a world where celebrating your child's birthday is considered idolatry, where making friends outside your religious community is seen as spiritual danger, where questioning even a single teaching could result in being completely cut off from everyone you've ever loved. This is an ancient history. This is happening right now, in communities all over the world. Behind closed doors, in kingdom halls from New York to Tokyo, millions of people are living under these restrictions, many of them believing with absolute certainty that this is what God requires of them. Today, we're going to explore 7 of the most bizarre, and some would say dangerous, prohibitions enforced by the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Some might seem harmless at first glance. Others will shock you. And by the time we reach the 7th and final prohibition, you'll understand why so many former members describe leaving this religion as escaping a prison they didn't even know they were in. So let's dive in, because what we're about to uncover isn't just about one religion's unusual rules. It's about how control works, how fear can masquerade as faith, and how questioning everything, even things that seem sacred, is sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do. 1. Refusal of blood transfusions. Let's start with the prohibition that has made headlines around the world, the one that has cost thousands of lives, including those of children who had no choice in the matter. The absolute refusal of blood transfusions. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that accepting blood, even in a life-or-death medical emergency, is a direct violation of God's law. This interpretation comes from several passages in the Old Testament that prohibit the eating of blood, along with a verse in the New Testament that mentions abstaining from blood. The organization takes these scriptures, originally about dietary laws, and applies them to modern medical procedures with absolute literalism. Now, think about what this means in practice. Picture a hospital emergency room. A mother has just been in a car accident. She's losing blood rapidly. The doctors say a transfusion will save her life with near certainty. Without it, she'll die within hours. But because she's a Jehovah's Witness, she refuses. Her family stands by, watching her fade away, believing that accepting blood would mean eternal damnation, that God would reject her for choosing to live. Or imagine a child with leukemia. Chemotherapy has worked. The cancer is gone, but the treatment has depleted the child's blood cells to dangerous levels. A simple transfusion would stabilize everything, giving this child a normal, healthy life. But the parents refuse on religious grounds. And in many cases, the courts step in too late. The organization has actually compiled a list of bloodless alternative treatments, and they've trained what they call hospital liaison committees to work with medical professionals to ensure members don't receive blood, even under pressure. They frame this as patient advocacy, as standing up for religious freedom. But former members describe it differently, as enforcement, as making sure no one breaks ranks, even when facing death. The tragic irony is that this interpretation isn't even consistent. The organization has changed its stance on blood fractions, on certain components of blood, creating complicated rules about what parts of blood are acceptable and which aren't. It's a policy that seems less about divine command and more about organizational control, control that has cost real lives including those of innocent children who never got to choose for themselves. 2. Prohibition of birthday celebrations. Now let's talk about something that might seem trivial compared to life-and-death medical decisions, but reveals something deeper about how this organization thinks. The prohibition of birthday celebrations. That's right, Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays. Not their own, not their children's, not anyone's. No birthday cakes, no happy birthday song, no parties, no presents. The reasoning? The organization points to 2 instances in the Bible where birthdays are mentioned. Pharaoh's birthday in the book of Genesis, where a man was executed, and King Herod's birthday in the New Testament, where John the Baptist was beheaded. According to Jehovah's Witnesses, since these 2 biblical birthdays resulted in deaths, all birthday celebrations are wrong. Think about the logic here for a moment. 2 bad events happened at birthday parties in the Bible, so all birthday celebrations for all time are forbidden? By that reasoning, we should probably avoid weddings too, since there are biblical accounts of weddings that went badly. We should never eat meals with friends because Judas betrayed Jesus at the Last Supper. But let's move beyond the questionable reasoning and think about the real impact. Imagine being a child growing up in this religion. You go to school and watch all your classmates celebrate their birthdays. They get excited, they bring cupcakes, everyone sings to them. But you? You sit there, excluded from the joy, taught to see this simple celebration as a form of idolatry, as excessive focus on the individual rather than on God. You grow up never experiencing that one day a year where people make you feel special just for being alive. Many former Jehovah's Witnesses describe this as their first real understanding that they were different, that they were separated from normal childhood experiences. It's a small thing, perhaps, but it's also a powerful tool of isolation, a constant reminder that you don't belong to the outside world. You belong to the organization. And that's really what this is about. Not about whether birthdays are scriptural or not, but about creating a sense of otherness, of being set apart. Because when you're different from everyone else, when your normal is completely foreign to the rest of society, you become dependent on the group that shares your strange normal. You become easier to control. 3. Avoiding friendship with worldly people. This brings us directly to our 3rd prohibition, the discouragement of friendships with anyone outside the religion, people they call worldly or worldlings. In Jehovah's Witness theology, the entire world outside the organization is under Satan's control. Every government, every other religion, every institution, and by extension, every person who isn't a Jehovah's Witness is part of Satan's system. The organization constantly quotes a scripture that says, bad associations spoil useful habits, using it to justify complete social isolation from non-believers. Now, they'll say they're not unkind to outsiders. They'll talk to you at work, they'll be polite neighbors, they'll certainly come to your door to preach. But deep, meaningful friendship? That's dangerous territory. Young Jehovah's Witnesses are taught from childhood to be friendly, but not to form real bonds with school friends. Adults are counseled to keep their relationships with colleagues professional, never personal. Think about what this does to a person's social world. Your entire support network becomes the congregation. Every friend you have is a fellow believer. Every social event is organized by the organization. Your entire concept of community is defined by your religious affiliation. And here's the insidious part. Once your whole world is inside the organization, leaving becomes almost impossible. Where'd you go? Everyone you know, everyone who knows you, everyone you could call in crisis, they're all witnesses. This isolation isn't accidental. It's policy. Former members describe how they were counseled against going to college, not just because of the worldly education, but because of the friendships they might form there. They were encouraged to keep their social circle within the Kingdom Hall, to spend their free time in spiritual activities with fellow believers, to view anyone outside as a potential source of corruption. The organization frames this as protection, as keeping pure from a wicked world. But it's also a cage, a comfortable cage, perhaps, where everyone speaks the same language and shares the same worldview. But a cage nonetheless, because when everyone you love is inside that cage with you, questioning the bars becomes an act of social suicide. 4. prohibition of popular holidays. But it gets stranger. Beyond birthdays, Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate any of the holidays that most of society take for granted. No Christmas, no Easter, no Mother's Day or Father's Day, no Thanksgiving, no New Year's, no Halloween, no Valentine's Day, no 4th of July. Nothing. The justification varies depending on the holiday. Christmas and Easter, pagan origins. Thanksgiving, too nationalistic. Halloween, demonic. Mother's Day shows more honor to mothers than to God. For virtually every celebration that brings joy and connection to families and communities around the world, the organization has found a reason why it's wrong, why participating would displease God, why faithful witnesses must abstain. Imagine December in a Jehovah's Witness household. The rest of the neighborhood has lights twinkling, trees glowing in windows, families gathering. Inside their home, nothing. No tree, no decorations, no presents, no special meal. Children go to school and listen to their classmates talk about what they got for Christmas, about family traditions, about the excitement. And these children, they sit silent, taught that all this joy is actually disguised paganism, that their classmates' families are unknowingly worshiping false gods. The isolation this creates is profound. Society runs on a calendar of celebrations. These holidays are when families reunite, when communities come together, when a year is marked with moments of joy and connection. Jehovah's Witnesses exist outside this calendar entirely. They've created their own alternative, Kingdom Hall meetings, assemblies, memorial services, but these are rarely celebrations in the normal sense. They're serious, studious, focused on doctrine and obedience. Former members often describe their first Christmas after leaving as an emotional experience. Some cry. Some feel guilty, even though they no longer believe. Because for their entire lives, they were taught that participating in these worldly celebrations was a betrayal of God. The programming runs deep. And once again, we see the pattern. Separation. Create enough differences between your members and the rest of society, and they'll naturally gravitate toward each other, toward the only place where their lifestyle makes sense. The organization isn't just controlling behavior, it's controlling belonging itself. 5. Political neutrality. Now let's examine something the organization presents as one of its most admirable qualities: political neutrality. Jehovah's Witnesses don't vote. They don't run for office. They don't protest or demonstrate. They don't salute the flag. In some countries, they don't even stand for the national anthem. They claim to be completely neutral in all political matters because, they say, they're citizens of God's kingdom, not of any earthly nation. On the surface, this might sound noble, above the fray of partisan politics, focused on spiritual rather than earthly matters. But look deeper, and you'll see something more troubling. This political neutrality has led to persecution in some countries, which the organization then uses as proof of their righteousness, evidence that they're being persecuted for their faith, just as Jesus predicted. During World War II, many Jehovah's Witnesses were imprisoned by the Nazis, not for being conscientious objectors to violence, but specifically for refusing to give the Nazi salute or show any allegiance to the state. They suffered terribly, and their courage in that context deserves recognition. But here's what's rarely discussed. This political neutrality isn't really about peace or spirituality. It's about allegiance. The organization demands exclusive allegiance from its members. You don't pledge loyalty to any government because you've already pledged total loyalty to the Watchtower organization. You don't vote because the organization tells you that political involvement is choosing Satan's system over God's kingdom. Think about what this means for social change. Every right we enjoy today, freedom of speech, women's rights, civil rights, labor protections, came from people who got involved, who voted, who protested, who fought for change. Jehovah's Witnesses benefit from all these freedoms, but are taught they must never participate in achieving them. They live in societies shaped by the civic engagement of others while remaining carefully, purposefully disengaged. And here's the real issue. This neutrality extends to everything except obedience to the organization itself. They may not vote for political leaders, but they must obey religious leaders without question. They may not salute their country's flag, but they must show absolute deference to the organization's governing body. Political neutrality? Perhaps. But spiritual neutrality? Never. The organization demands everything. 6. Pacifism and refusal of military service. Closely related to their political neutrality is the absolute prohibition on military service. Jehovah's Witnesses are pacifists. They will not serve in any military capacity, will not participate in war, will not even work in defense industries or factories that produce weapons. They base this on Jesus' teaching to love your enemies, and on their belief that all governments are part of Satan's world. Again, on the surface, pacifism seems admirable. War is terrible. Violence is destructive. Who would want a world where everyone refused to fight? But within the Jehovah's Witness framework, this pacifism comes with a dark undercurrent. Young men raised as Jehovah's Witnesses face intense pressure when military service is required in their country. Refuse, and you may face imprisonment, as many have throughout history. But accept? The consequences within the organization are severe. Possible disfellowshipping, complete social isolation, being marked as someone who chose the world over God. The organization holds up those who went to prison rather than serve in the military as examples of faith. And yes, there's courage in standing by your convictions. But there's also a question that's rarely asked. Is this conviction really theirs? Or is it the organization's conviction, imposed through a lifetime of indoctrination and enforced through the threat of losing everyone and everything they know? Because here's the thing, the organization's pacifism is selective. They won't fight in human wars, but they eagerly await Armageddon, a cosmic war where they believe God will violently destroy everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. Every non-believer, every person who rejected their message, every child of worldly parents, all slaughtered by divine action. They preach against human violence while fantasizing about divine violence on an unprecedented scale. 7. Shunning of apostates and unquestioning obedience. And now we reach the darkest prohibition of all, the one that former members describe as the most devastating, the most psychologically damaging, the one that keeps people trapped even when they stop believing. Mandatory shunning of former members, combined with demanded, unquestioning obedience to the organization's leadership. If you leave Jehovah's Witnesses, or if you're expelled for breaking their rules, something called disfellowshipping happens. And when you're disfellowshipped, every Jehovah's Witness must shun you completely. Your parents won't talk to you. Your siblings will treat you as if you're dead. Friends you've known your entire life will look through you as if you're invisible. If you try to approach them, they'll turn away. If you call them, they'll hang up. The organization calls this loving discipline. They claim it's meant to shock the person into repentance, to make them want to return. But talk to anyone who's been shunned, and you'll hear a different story. You'll hear about devastating grief, about the loss of every relationship that ever mattered, about parents who can't attend their own child's wedding, about grandparents who aren't allowed to meet their grandchildren, about the complete annihilation of a person's entire social world. And it gets worse, because the category of people who must be shunned includes not just those expelled for immoral behavior, but apostates. Anyone who questions the organization's teachings, anyone who speaks publicly about their doubts, anyone who reads apostate literature or websites, anyone who simply decides this isn't the truth and walks away. Think about the control mechanism here. You're taught from childhood that leaving the organization means losing everything. Not just spiritually, the organization teaches you'll die, Armageddon if you leave, but socially. Everyone you love will be forced to cut you off. Your family will have to choose between you and their faith. And 99 times out of 100, they'll choose the faith because they've been taught that maintaining a relationship with you could cost them their own salvation. This is how you keep people trapped. This is how you prevent questions from being asked. Because the cost of questioning isn't just spiritual anxiety. It's the potential loss of every human connection you have. But the shunning policy is only half of this final prohibition. The other half is the demand for unquestioning obedience to the organization's leadership, the governing body. These men, currently 8 of them, claim to be God's only channel of communication on earth. They produce the teachings, write the literature, interpret the Bible, and make the rules. And questioning them isn't just discouraged, it's grounds for expulsion. Think about what this means. You're not allowed to have doubts. You're not allowed to disagree with interpretations. You're not allowed to point out inconsistencies or failed predictions. And there have been many, including multiple false predictions about Armageddon. You're not allowed to think for yourself, to study independently, to come to your own conclusions about what the Bible teaches. The organization has changed its teachings repeatedly over the years. Doctrines that were once considered absolute truth are now old light. Rules that once meant disfellowshipping are now acceptable. But members aren't allowed to question why, aren't allowed to express confusion or doubt about these changes. They're simply told, the governing body has received new understanding from God, and faithful Christians accept it without question. This is spiritual abuse masquerading as faithfulness. This is control masquerading as devotion. Because true faith doesn't require the elimination of doubt. It allows for wrestling with questions. True spirituality doesn't threaten you with the loss of everyone you love if you disagree. True religion doesn't demand that you check your brain at the door and simply obey. Former members describe leaving as awakening from a dream, or more accurately, escaping from a nightmare they'd been told was paradise. Many go through years of therapy, working through what psychologists recognize as religious trauma syndrome. They have to rebuild their entire concept of reality, learn to think for themselves, create new social networks from scratch, and deal with the grief of losing their families. And yet, the organization continues to grow, continues to recruit, continues to present itself as the only path to salvation. Behind every smiling witness at your door is this reality, a system of control so complete, so all-encompassing, that many members don't even realize they're controlled. They think they're free. They think they're serving God. They think everyone else is in darkness, and they alone have the light. So there you have it. 7 prohibitions that, taken together, reveal something far more significant than simply unusual religious rules. They show us how control works, how fear can be packaged as faith, how isolation can be framed as protection, how obedience can be demanded in the name of love. From refusing life-saving blood transfusions to eliminating birthdays and holidays, from enforced isolation from non-believers to mandatory political neutrality, from compulsory pacifism to the devastation of shunning. Each prohibition serves a purpose beyond its stated religious justification. Each one separates members from mainstream society. Each one makes leaving more difficult. Each one reinforces dependence on the organization. These 7 prohibitions work together as a system, creating an environment where questioning becomes almost impossible, where leaving becomes unthinkable, where total obedience becomes the only way to survive within your community. It's a masterclass in organizational control, built over more than a century and refined to near perfection. But here's what's important to remember. The thousands of people who've found the courage to leave, who've rebuilt their lives, who've reconnected with reality despite losing everything they knew, they prove that escape is possible. Freedom is possible. Healing is possible. And perhaps the most important question isn't whether Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth. Perhaps it's this: does God really want to be worshipped by people who are afraid of Him, controlled by Him, threatened into obedience? Or does genuine spirituality require freedom? The freedom to question, the freedom to doubt, the freedom to choose love without the threat of destruction? I'll leave you with that question. And if you know someone who's a Jehovah's Witness, or if you're questioning your own involvement, know that your doubts are valid, your questions are legitimate, and freedom is worth whatever it costs.